Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So as you guys hopefully saw, the legal analysis assignment has been posted. You have 5 more days to do it, so it's not something that you need to panic about right now. I do hope you got a chance to look over it, look at the back pattern. It's going to be about obscenity and indecency and all of that fun stuff. I want to make a couple of things really clear from the outset. First things first, this is not persuasive. You are not trying to convince me that your side is right and that the other side is wrong. This is a research paper. Okay? You are not supposed to try and persuade me one way or another. Now, that being said, there are some right or wrong answers, right? There are like if you give me a misstatement of law, I will take points off of you. However, if you do the research and you apply the law correctly and do all that fun stuff, and you come to a different conclusion, then I'm not going to take off for that. Because again, this is a research paper, and you might give a conclusion, but that's different than trying to persuade me that you are right. Okay? I simply want you to give me an educated guess or an educated prediction as what the outcome of the case would happen to be. Number 2, I cannot stress enough the importance of reading the handout about the IRAC structure. IRAC is acronym, I think. I don't know why I blanked on what those things are called, but I think it's an acronym about how to write a legal analysis answer. I stands for issue. Issue is the legal problem, the legal question that you are trying to solve. By and large, it's going to be, is this indecent? Is it obscene? And how does that impact where and how this material can be shown, if at all? Rule statement is where you tell me what the legal rules you are using to arrive at your conclusion. Again, I don't really care about the conclusion. If the conclusion is based on faulty knowledge of law or faulty application, that's one thing. But overall, I'm not grading you on they got the right answer right, they got the answer wrong. This is your opportunity to show me your work. And when you are telling me the rule, what essentially you're doing is you're talking to an ignorant reader and explaining to them what the law is. I am not Professor Bischini, who has been teaching about obscenity and decency for several years now. I obviously know what indecency is. I obviously know what obscenity is. You guys would be getting very poor bang for your buck if you knew more about the law than I did. However, the reader, you're supposed to be writing to a reader who doesn't know what the law is. So don't just say it's not obscene because obscenity is blank, or because it's not. You know, you're a professor, you're a lawyer, you know this stuff. Tell me what obscenity is. Tell me what indecency is. Then you're going to apply the rules to you're going to apply the facts in the pattern to the legal rules. So we take scene 1. I'm not going to tell you what the answer is, but scene 1 involves a violent and graphic scene, a war scene where there's lots of blood and guts. Your job is to determine whether or not it is obscene or whether or not it's indecent. You tell me what obscenity is. Obscenity is material appealing to the prurient interest without essentially societal saving grace, right? You're going to go through that 3-part test. Does violence meet that? Does a war scene meet that? And then the answer is going to be yes or no. It is going to be stilted writing. I imagine some of you guys have taken screenwriting classes or creative writing classes or directing classes where you're taught how to express yourself beautifully and with great flair and a way to get an emotional reaction. That pathos and ethos and all those things from AP English I do not remember because I did not do very well in AP English. But this is not that. This is the stilted, most boring writing you can possibly come up with. The issue in the case is, does this meet the definition of obscenity or indecency? Obscenity is defined as blank. Indecency is defined as blank. Safe harbor laws are blank. This is But in this particular case, this is the scene. This is why it's obscene. This is not why it's obscene. In the end, the FCC is likely to determine that it is obscene or it is not obscene. This is going to be very boring for me to read, and that means that you guys are doing a good job. If you have questions about that, please let me know. The other thing that I think was very nice of me is I put up a sample question and a sample answer. Please read those. It should follow the same structure. I wrote them. I'm pretty sure that I got all of it right. And I'm pretty sure that that's the outcome that I'm looking for, right? So please read it. Please ask me any questions. And finally, and most importantly, maybe not most importantly, while I do want you to take it seriously, understand that this is unlike anything you've done before. And in reflection of that, I have given you guys the opportunity to rewrite this. You will get a grade. Most of you guys will be very unhappy with your grade the first time around. In a typical semester, only a couple of people get A's because it is unlike anything you guys have ever done. I will grade it. If you are happy with that grade, you can keep it. If you are unhappy with that grade, you can rewrite it for a full grade replacement. So if you get a D on your first draft and then you really take my, and I'm going to try and give you guys as specific feedback as I can. You take that specific feedback to heart, you do something better, you get a 95, you get the 95. That D goes away. So treat this as a graded rough draft. The exception to this is that my grades, it is due Monday at 11:59. You can turn it in late, they'll still give you a grade, that's fine. I'm not going to give you guys specific feedback, okay? And so it'll just say, hey, you got an 85, you got a 75, but nothing else. Everybody turns it in beforehand is going to get specific feedback. I'm also available for email. I'm available via web chat or Google Hangouts like we're doing here. I'm available. I want you guys to do as well as possible. This is our first real substantive thing that you guys got to get done. You have 5 days to do it. Overall, it shouldn't be more. The very, very in-depth answer should be 1,500 words, which is about 3 pages, single-spaced. It's not the most extensive research paper you guys are going to have to do in college. So let me know if you have questions, because I want to make sure that's helped out. Does anybody here in the room or does anybody online have any questions about this? Awesome. All right, so we're going to now return to our conversation about the rights of journalists. And as we talked about at the end of last class, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a very confusing and very difficult to follow opinion, seems to imply that journalists are not entitled to any sort of special protection. That a journalist for the New York Times or Fox News or The Economist is entitled to the same constitutional protections as some guy with a Twitter account who has never made a cent working as a journalist. But for all the policy reasons laid out by the dissent in Brandenburg versus Hayes, as well as the ones kind of underpinning our First Amendment, right? We have the press as a check on the government. It's important for the free and democratic process to play out, that we have an independent press that is not subject to attacks by the government, and without special protections, it makes it more difficult for the population to make informed choices about their leaders and laws that are being passed. And the majority in Brandenburg versus Hayes says explicitly, this is a conversation that you should be having with your legislatures. The Constitution doesn't say that journalists are entitled to special protection. In the same way the Constitution does not possess any testimonial privileges for spouses or doctors or lawyers. You want protection for journalists, go to your legislatures, and that's exactly what they did. 48 states have passed laws protecting journalists, but it varies wildly. We're going to look at North Carolina because it is pretty close to what we consider the majority rule. And you guys live in North Carolina, so chances are that's where you will be working, at least in the short term. So, in North Carolina, a journalist has qualified privilege against disclosure of any legal proceeding, of any confidential or non-confidential information, document, or item obtained or preparing while acting as a journalist. That is convoluted as heck. will follow. What it means is you acquire information or materials working in the scope of your journalism, it is subject to at least some amount of protection beyond other people. It's important, though, that it has to be in the process of actually getting, you have to be working as a journalist. So if you are being investigated for tax fraud because you're a journalist who just does not like to do their taxes or pay the full amount of taxes, you don't get to say, you don't get to see my tax records. I'm a journalist, I got this privilege. No, that's you as a private citizen. It's only material obtained in your professional capacity. Now, the assumption is in North Carolina, when a journalist has information, whether this be the identity of a source or classified documents or whatever it happens to be, that they will not be forced to turn it over to the government unless the government can show all of the following. To give you guys an idea, we have a 3-part test here, all right? The government has to show all of the following. Number 1, the material has to be relevant to and material to the proper administration of the legal proceeding for which the testimony or production is sought. Essentially, it has to be important. If the question becomes what color shirt was a defendant in a car accident case wearing, so I, as the court system, is going to try and get access to the local newspaper's confidential personnel files. No, that is an incredible overreach for information that is not even relevant to the outcome of a case. Additionally, it has to be specifically mentioned. This first little prong is designed to prevent journalists, to prevent prosecutors and cops and court systems or whomever of going on a fishing expedition, essentially saying, journalism, you guys might have some information about some crime somewhere, so if you wouldn't mind, please tell us who all your relevant sources are. Number 2, cannot be obtained from alternative means. Essentially, if the government can get the information by doing something other than subpoenaing a journalist, then they have to do that. Do your own investigation. You're cops. It's what we pay our tax dollars for you to do, is do investigations and investigate crime and find out who's doing what. Now, you might be able to go after the journalist as a matter of last resort, but you at least have to make a good, honest effort to get this information another way. Number 3, it is essential to the maintenance of a claim or defense of the person whose testimony or production is sought. This means that it has to be important to the case. Essentially, if we don't learn the identity of a source, if we don't get access to these documentations, does it change the outcome? Does it have the potential to change the outcome? If the answer is no, I'm not going to worry about it. If the answer is yes, then we might. I'm going to hit this really quick because this is not something that happens anymore. This is something that was kind of in vogue 15, 20 years ago during maybe like the second Bush administration. There is no federal shield law. That's the important thing you guys need to know. Because you're wondering, like, why do we really care about what the Supreme Court said? Unless you live in Wyoming or Hawaii, journalists are entitled to pretty good protection. The federal government can investigate crimes, and they can throw you in federal jail, and they can grand juries can issue subpoenas from a federal court. There is zero protection for journalists under federal law. Now, the other reason I put this up is because about 10 years ago, Senators Charles Schumer and Lindsey Graham, who, the idea of them working together now, for anybody who watches CNN for 5 minutes can attest, this definitely represents the breakdown of bipartisanship in DC. And maybe you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Again, not a poli-sci class, but it used to be a relatively bipartisan thing. Alabama protected journalists, and North Carolina protected journalists, and California protected journalists. This wasn't a partisan issue by and large. This was passed in the Senate, but it failed in the House. So as it stands right now, there is no protection for journalists under federal law. And the other reason I have this up here is because it does something that North Carolina law doesn't. And it really goes into treating different types of cases differently. Essentially, if you're a journalist and you know where a terrorist is, you're not going to get a lot of protection. If you're a journalist but maybe know who might be smoking pot, or maybe know who, what's going on with a contract case or stuff like that. Like if you're Adam Schefter and you get subpoena, like tell me who your source with the Philadelphia Eagles is, like who really gives a crap? It's football. Nobody's going to get hurt if Adam Schefter doesn't reveal his source. Might be a little bit different for a national security case. Oh, student speech went away. Okay, it's missing a title card. What is the difference from a constitutional perspective between the University of North Carolina and Duke University? Duke is a private school, that is right. Everything we are going to talk about for the rest of this class will apply here at UNCG, where I am, where you are students. But if we go a quarter mile that way to Greensboro College, or a mile down the road to Elon Law School, none of this stuff matters. We will be talking about high school students. If you get into high school for a private school, none of this matters. Public school does. So we're going to watch. Okay, we are not going to be watching this. So, because Google Chrome does not like to actually embed stuff the way that I would like for it to. So, Mary Beth Tinker. Let me see if I can make this work. Swear to God. So we're going to do this. Okay, so let me give you guys some background on this case. Now, Tinker is honestly is kind of cited as the first case that really dealt with the issue of whether or not students had free speech rights in the classroom. Not entirely true. Because in 1948, we already established that you could not force students to stand for the pledge. We talked about that way back, like the third class of the semester, where the idea of forcing students to stand is akin to forcing students to speak, and students, despite the fact that they are in school, have at least some free speech rights. So this is not a novel concept, but it is kind of the culmination of the first time it was really put down in really clear words. But let me give you some background first. 1965, we have the Vietnam War, really just starting to kick off. And in response to the Vietnam War, 4 students, including Mary Beth Tinker, who was 16 years old at the time, decided to wear black armbands. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys, when you were in high school, had similar types of protests, right? You and really passive. And that's going to be a really, really key thing here, really passive protest. You're going to wear an armband, or you're going to wear a particular t-shirt or something like that, right? A passive show of support or resistance for a particular cause. Black armbands, what happened here? Principals of the various school systems in Des Moines, Iowa got together and they determined that they would make a dress code amendment where people could not wear armbands to school. Both Mary Beth Tinker and Christopher Eckhart wore armbands and were suspended. Students filed suit. Now, let's start with a very, very basic question. Is speech even involved here? Is this expression? How do we know it's expression? A really good hint that it's expression. It's clothing, right? And sometimes clothing can be expression, right? It's a symbolism, right? Because it's certainly symbolic speech. Why would principals ban armbands? What justification can you give? Is it a safety hazard? Is it going to impact, is it going to make students, is it going to make it difficult for them to see the blackboard? Why are they banning it? Because they don't like what it represents. If you're banning something because you don't like the symbol it's presenting or you don't like what it's expressing, then congratulations, you have speech. Because remember, way back, beginning of the semester, Spence versus Washington. What is the test for determining whether or not something is speech, whether or not communication, expressive content is found? Is there an intent to convey a message, and is that message likely to be understood by the population as a whole? Here, the answer is absolutely yes. Because otherwise, why the heck would these principals care? Now, the issue, and this is why I make sure that we go through the kind of IRAC structure here. The issue is, the constitutional question before the court is, symbolic speech by public school students protected under the First Amendment, yes or no? And the holding, which is the ruling of the court, was that yes, that students are protected by the First Amendment while both in and out of the classroom. I really like this statement for reasons that I will get into in a second. It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And the reason I like that quote so much is because my dad, as much as I love my dad, was an elementary school principal and has been for 40 years now. And I, the annoying soon-to-be lawyer I was when I was 12 years old and a member of his school, would constantly like, well, I have free speech rights and I can say what I want. And I was just being a pissy little 12-year-old. And he would say, no, John, you don't have free speech rights. You're a student. You want to have free speech rights, you can do that outside of class. And I believed him because he was my dad and he was a very educated man. And then I went to law school and read Tinker and went home and read him this quote and was very proud of myself. But he is right in a certain sense. Because we can all just intuitively know that while the First Amendment protects the rights of white supremacists to march through a predominantly Black or Hispanic or Asian neighborhood, that we are not going to allow the same level of racism, the same level of really uncomfortable or even despicable speech in the classroom. It would make learning impossible. So we have on one hand my dear old dad's opinion that students should have no free speech rights because it is important that they are there to learn and not express themselves, and that's going to create discipline problems, and et cetera, et cetera. And people have got to watch, people have to go to school with somebody who's wearing a swastika on their armband, right? We are going to be somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. And one of the nice things the court did in Tinker was lay out the rule of law. So the rule of law is that when acting as an educator, the government may restrict speech if it, quote, materially and substantially interferes with the requirements of the appropriate discipline in the operation of the school. Essentially, if the student speech or the student expression is going to make it more difficult for the school to carry out its essential function of educating a population, then the school can discipline or stop it. It's a two-part test, but it's a disjunctive test. The school is able to censor classroom speech if either of these things are met. This is a really vague and I don't think I know I just said it was very nice of the Supreme Court to lay out this test, but I don't think it's particularly helpful. Because it's all the school's got to show is that the expression would result in material or substantial disruption of normal school activities or invade the rights of others. And the court in Tinker found that it violated the student's right because it was intended to punish the students for a silent, passive, expressive opinion. Mary Beth Tinker and Christopher Eckhart were sitting in their seats. They were learning calculus and US history and economics, just like everybody else was. They were not standing up and shouting and chanting slogans or walking out of the classroom, none of that stuff. They were wearing a piece of clothing. It was silent, it was passive. Number two, really good evidence that the black armbands didn't cause material or substantial disruption of normal school activities is because the students wore the black armbands for a day, nothing happened, and then they were banned. So it was kind of difficult for the school system to go into court and say it disrupted class when they have solid evidence that it didn't. And then finally, that the school singled out black armbands for prohibition. And that's going to be the other thing that is really, really important. The government is going, or school systems are going to be given some amount of power to limit what can be said and what expression is tolerated, because by and large, a court is going to defer to a school's opinion that something is going to result in material or substantial disruption of normal school activities. Because judges are going to trust the expertise and the real-time knowledge of administrators and teachers. However, what's going to absolutely throw that on its head is if the censorship is viewpoint-based and results in viewpoint or content discrimination. Black armbands were banned in Des Moines after Mary Beth Tinker wore her armband in 1965. You know what wasn't banned? Somebody wearing a big old t-shirt that had a big American flag and said, "Go to Vietnam, screw communism." So it was a policy. So if the school's argument is that protest or discussion of the Vietnam War is going to make it impossible for teachers to teach calculus or economics or US history, that by supporting the war, that was allowed. But objecting to the war, it was not. And the school had no logical reason as to why one would be disruptive and the other one wouldn't. So for example, we can all agree, maybe we can't all agree, but I certainly can, that September through November 2nd, and probably even a little bit after November 2nd of 2020, it was not too easy to talk about politics with friends or family or anybody here. And so we can all agree that there's at least an argument that if you had students wearing Biden or Trump shirts in a high school, that there is the potential for at least some amount of disruption there. And so if a school passed a regulation that said students are not allowed to wear political t-shirts or t-shirts supporting a particular candidate for elected office, I don't know that that would hold water. I think it's close. I think different judges are going to come to different opinions on that one. But what I do know is that if an administrator came out and said, well, we're going to let students wear Biden shirts. But Trump shirts, those are particularly disruptive. So Biden's fine, or Green Party's fine, or Libertarian is fine, but just don't wear anything Republican. That's when you run into trouble. And that's honestly where the Des Moines school system was the most screwed. If they had set a policy, no political expression in the classroom, again, don't know that it would have held up, but it certainly would have been a lot stronger case than what they brought to the court at the time. Okay, and this is happening again. Awesome. I really appreciate that for you guys in here. It's not working. So, we're going to talk about, and this is something that I do understand is sensitive, But I do want to get your guys' thoughts if you, hold on. That I do want to get your guys' thoughts on. But I do want to also draw a comparison to the case that we looked at way back when, Cohen versus California. Remember when the guy wore "fuck the draft" to the courthouse? That was a passive expression. And this was around the same time. It was actually involving the same war that they were protesting, right? And there was this growing understanding that when somebody is being passive, that they have the right to express themselves without fear of being shut down. And this idea that, no, and like, I'm sure that there were people who had problems with the wearing of the black armband, or I'm sure that there were people who found it difficult to be in jury duty when the guy was wearing "fuck the draft." But you know whose problem that is? The person who sees it. If we are so concerned with disruption in the classroom that we don't allow anything controversial because we are worried about somebody getting angry and upset and either having violence or not being able to learn, then we are catering to the irrational reaction. There is a constant understanding with First Amendment jurisprudence. Whether or not you agree with it is your own prerogative, but it is consistent for the past 100 years of this area of case law that we do not allow for heckler's veto. That you, as an informed and rational member of a society, should be able to see something that makes you angry, see something that makes you offended, see something that you find objectionable, and still be able to carry on with your life. Because if we stop somebody from speaking because of an irrational potential reaction, then we are punishing the person for expressing themselves because somebody else acted incorrectly, somebody else acted wrong. And we are essentially targeting the victim rather than the perpetrator. There are some exceptions to that, right? That does not at all square with the fighting words doctrine, and I do understand that. But that is what we're looking at. Now, in Durham, a couple of years ago, during especially the Silent Sam protests that were going on at UNC Chapel Hill, the Durham school system made it illegal for individuals to wear Confederate flag paraphernalia while in a public school. Now, on its surface, this is exactly the same as what happened in Tinker. Because somebody could wear a Confederate flag t-shirt, a Confederate flag armband, and be in classroom. It's a passive expression of a political viewpoint. Nobody's just wearing the Confederate flag because they like those stars and stripes. Nobody's wearing it because they think it's a cool pattern. There is an expressive element to that. So I'm curious as to what you guys think. Is what Durham did by banning the Confederate flag, is it constitutional? Before we even get to whether or not you guys agree with it, can you guys think of differences between wearing a black armband to protest the Vietnam War and wearing a Confederate flag to a public high school? What's one really obvious one? You know what the Vietnam War did not involve? Literally owning of other people based on the color of their skin, right? And so when you have an integrated school system, right? Maybe if we had just white high schools and black high schools, this might not be an issue, but thank God we have integrated school systems. And so somebody wearing a Confederate flag, even if the individual student who is wearing it is not intending for it to have a racial component, is it going to make it at least arguably more difficult for certain students to be able to learn in that environment? And is that rational, right? Again, we're not going to cater to irrationality. That's one difference. Is it a material difference? Should we still say that, yes, I understand it's offensive, I understand that you think it's offensive, I understand that what that person might mean as a statement of Southern pride or Southern heritage, you take as a symbol of racism. And I'm, again, not in any way saying one thing is correct and the other one is not. And the reason I'm saying that is not because I don't have my own opinion on that matter, but because the government cannot be in the business of approving or disapproving viewpoints. So you can't, the answer cannot be, well, we don't like the Confederate flag, it's bad. We like protesting the Vietnam War because Vietnam War sucked, but we do not like the Confederate flag. It can't be that simple. You have to think of a real and concrete reason that it might be disruptive. If you guys don't know, that's fine. I'm not going to force anybody to answer, but I'm curious if anybody has a strong opinion on that. Something to think about. Courts, by and large, have, to give you an idea, by and large, have upheld bans on Confederate flags in classes because of the potential for disruption. I do not know if it went to the Supreme Court what would happen. Because while I do believe it is different than what happened in Tinker, because just frankly, there's a difference between a Confederate battle flag and opposition to the Vietnam War. And I think you'd have to be willfully ignorant to assume that there isn't. Whether or not we should still expect students to be able to see speech, see expression that they find offensive, and not react negatively to it. I don't know. I'm sure my dad is going to have a very strong opinion one particular way, but I don't know. Anyway, so that is Tinker. And Tinker in 1965, or 1968, that's when the case was actually heard. 1968 said, students have free speech rights and students have the ability to engage in the type of marketplace of ideas and free expression or free exchange of controversial issues as anybody else. And that's where I was for about 10 to 15 years. And then we got the case of Frazier versus Bethel School District. Frazier. Did you guys have student government elections? I don't know how it was for you guys, but for my high school, we'd get the entire school together, you know, our big old gym, and then like we'd have like all the people for junior class, you know, all the candidates for junior class treasury get up and talk about how they were going to fix the school by doing stuff in student government, and then all they do is plan prom. Sorry for any student government people out there. I just didn't seem to, I never saw a huge difference depending on who was in charge. Except for they were supposed to organize my 10-year high school reunion and never did. But that's what we were talking about here, right? This was a, and Frazier was giving a speech on behalf of one of his friends. And I'm going to read it in full. I know a man who is firm. He's firm in his pants. He's firm in his shirt. His character is firm. But most of all, his belief in you, the students of Bethel, is firm. Jeff Coleman is a man who takes his point and pounds it in. If necessary, you get where I'm going. Is he talking about his friend Jeff's convictions? No, he is not. He is trying to be funny, as 16-year-old boys think that they often are. Mr. Frazier was suspended for being lewd, crude, and lascivious, as our friend George Carlin would say. Sorry for all. I'm going in another frame. Sorry. Frazier sued. Frazier said, "Look, I got this fancy Supreme Court case in 1968 that says Tinker cannot be suspended because students have a free speech right. We even have this really great passage that says students do not check their free speech rights at the door when they enter a classroom." I didn't see it impacting anybody's ability to learn calculus. I didn't see anybody's impact in the school's ability to carry out its daily functions. There was not a riot of school children because somebody had a sexual innuendo in a speech for a student body vice president, and at the end of the day, who really gives a crap about student body vice president, right? Like, what is the big deal here? with the court. And so on its surface, this should be an easy win for Frazier, right? Show me the destruction. They couldn't do it. Or at least I don't think they made a particularly strong case. However, the suspension was held as valid, and it was determined that it did not abridge Frazier's First Amendment right. And the reasoning for the court is really, I'm going to say outdated. You can say downright sexist. That's fine. I think that that's probably more accurate. The reasoning, first off, is that it is an appropriate function of public schools' education to prohibit the use of vulgar and offensive terms in public discourse. So, for all of what we've talked about for this entire semester, we're getting to March. Like, we've been talking about this stuff for a while. We've been in the business of understanding that governments should not have the ability to say something is offensive, something is vulgar. What one person believes is unnecessary filth, another person believes is an appropriate expression of extreme emotion. And all of a sudden, when somebody's 17 years old, it's all the same. Or that vulgar speech is somehow worse than regular unvulgar speech. The second thing, the speech was insulting to teenage girl students. So for any girls here, 16-year-old boys, it's fine. It is totally okay. We can handle this locker room talk. But you delicate little flowers, you girls in high school, well, we got to protect you, right? We got to protect your virtue or whatever else. And this is not something you would see in a modern day Supreme Court decision. And smacks of what the now unfortunately departed Ruth Bader Ginsburg described as romantic paternalism. That we think so highly of girls, so highly of women, that we are going to infantilize them and make sure that they are never exposed to anything hard, anything crude, anything that will sully their femininity. So if you want to look at one of the reasons that I don't think Frazier's going to hold up as particularly good case law anymore, saying girls can't hear slightly bad words might be a pretty good indication as to how outdated it is. And then number 3, the punishment was unrelated to any political viewpoint. Here, the expression of opposition to a Vietnam War is a political viewpoint, and we do understand that political speech is valued higher than other types of speech. And this is pretty consistent with some other case law we've seen. This is absolutely consistent with FCC versus Pacifica and George Carlin, for example. There, the Supreme Court had no issue drawing a distinction between political speech and vulgar or indecent speech. Is that persuasive? I'm not convinced it is. But we at least have 2 things that come out of this case. Number 1, we understand that Tinker is still good law, right? There are cases that overturn previous decisions. When Obergefell versus Hodges came out and it found that same-sex marriage was constitutionally protected, it just flat out said Bowers v. Hardwick, which was a previous decision involving the exact same case, that was wrong. It was wrong when it was decided. It is no longer good law. They got it wrong then, and we're going to overturn it. And it explicitly rejects a previous Supreme Court decision and the precedent it set. Here, that is not the case. They did not say that Tinker is wrong. They did not overturn Tinker. They simply distinguished it. Said Tinker does not apply here. The other thing that came out of this case was that they drew a distinction between political expression and pure vulgarity, pure indecency. Speech that in other areas of law might be entitled to less protection. This is my favorite question to ask in the semester, so I really do hope I get some participation. I want people to tell me, and I am not moving on until I get some answers out of this, and I'm not kidding, I will stare at you for another 20 minutes until we all go home. I want you guys to tell me what bong hits for Jesus mean. and that is the only source of information I'm giving you on this, what does bong hits for Jesus mean? Yeah. They want to get so high that they see God. I do like that. Not irrational, right? It's a religious experience. There are religions out there that incorporate marijuana into their rituals. What else? That's one. Anybody have any other ideas as to what it might mean? Maybe Jesus did bong hits back in Galilee with the apostles. Yeah. Take a hit for Jesus, right? Show your support of Jesus by doing a bong hit. Okay? I like that one. Now, what if I told you a kind of protest for marijuana legalization, as Aaron said? Yeah. It grows in the ground. Jesus may have done it. I don't know. I wasn't Jesus, but Jesus might have smoked pot. Why are we criminalizing this lovely plant that Jesus gave us in all of his infinite wisdom? Possibly. Now, what if I told you that this sign was held up outside of an Olympic torch relay as the Olympic torch for the 2002 Salt Lake City Games was going by? I want you to think about what was potentially the motivation of those students by holding up this sign. We're on TV! Because you know what news crews are really going to find funny and probably put on TV is when they're going past a high school and just a bunch of students hold up a crazy sign that says bong hits for Jesus. You know what? It worked. They got on TV. But we can all kind of agree that it's not entirely clear what bong hits for Jesus means. I still don't know, and I've been thinking about this for a decade now. So let me give you some background on the first thing that was really interesting about this case was that should the school speech doctrine even apply here? They were off campus. It was like across the street. The answer was yes, because it was a school function. And therefore, school had enough control over it where they could make it part of the school speech doctrine. Because like most of the time, schools are not able to punish students because they want to punish students. They have to punish students because it has a tangential relationship to school activities, right? So otherwise, the school has no jurisdiction. The question then became, what does bong hits for Jesus mean? And there were different interpretations that the court laid out. And one of the reasons I really like doing what I do is sometimes we get these crazy situations in which 9 of the most learned people in this country are sitting down around a table and trying to figure out what the hell some 14-year-olds meant when they wrote bong hits for Jesus in Anchorage, Alaska. But that's what the 9 Supreme Court justices did, and they came up with a couple of different hypotheticals, some of which were the ones that you brought in, right? Legalization. This is a natural plant. It is something that people should be able to do. Bong hits for Jesus means that we should legalize marijuana. That's an important thing if that's what the court determines is going on here, because that is a political statement. It's silly. It's presented in a very kind of dumb way, but it's a political statement. It's advocating for the overturn of a prohibition of a substance. Number 2, is it a religious expression? Do bong hits for Jesus, right? Show support for Jesus by doing bong hits. Or incorporate marijuana into your church going. Whatever happens to be, right? That is a religious expression. Religious expressions are going to be entitled to the same level of protection as political speech. Number 3, is it advocacy for, and this is the one that you guys kind of danced around but didn't really hit. It is the advocacy for breaking the law. Everybody do bong hits. Now we know it's illegal. It's going to stay illegal. But we want you, the student, to have some bong hits. Or number 4 is a nonsense phrase, just trying to get on TV. In which case, if that's it, then all of a sudden we're out of tinker. We're in terms of political expression, we're in tinker. And we're looking at whether or not the school can prohibit it on the basis of political expression. If it's just a nonsense phrase or a phrase intended to get a laugh, then all of a sudden we're back with Frasier, with his firm in the pants guy, right? And a lower level of protection is going to be given to that phrase. And the court danced around it in a really frustrating way. I really hate. I'm not even saying that the decision they reached was wrong, because again, I'm not here to tell you whether decisions are wrong, but it's a really annoying way in which they get there. They decided that they could restrict student speech at a school event that a reasonable observer would interpret as advocating illegal drug use. And the problem I have with that, and okay, first off, what do I think is the most likely thing that they were doing? I think they were just some idiots trying to get on TV. They're like 15. I think that's what 15-year-olds do. But the problem I personally have, but although is a case law, is that it again shifts the burden here. And it puts the burden on the individual to police how their statements are going to be interpreted. We have a libertarian approach to free speech in this country. We just do, for better or for worse. And we say, you hear something you don't like, that's on you, right? You interpret something a certain way, that is on you. We are not going to stop somebody from expressing something the way they see fit because you take it a certain way. But then all of a sudden, somebody's 16 or 17 years old, and they have to be more cognitive of how their speech is being interpreted. They have to be more analytical in expressing themselves in a particular way. It seems backwards to me. But that's what the court said. And so they said, as long as the school administrators in good faith determined that the speech could be interpreted reasonably as advocacy for illegal activity, advocating for illegal activity does have the potential to make it more difficult to run class. And that I agree with, right? If you had a bunch of people going around in a high school classroom saying, like, do you know what would be amazing is if we all got really high right now. And rather than learn calculus, we all just we smoke marijuana, we do bong hits for Jesus. That is something where, okay, I can agree with the school administrators that we got a problem there. But saying that somebody might interpret that way, I don't know. But that's Morse versus Frederick, the bong hits for Jesus case. And now we're going to get Tinker as applied to universities. What are some of the differences between high school and college experiences? There can be a lot of them. Can anybody give me just some of the basic ones in terms of the actual classroom experience? What's different now for you personally, the students who are in here, now as opposed to when you were in high school? I assume all of you are 18 or older now, right? That means you are capable of voting, you are capable of owning a firearm, you are capable of doing a whole bunch of other stuff, right? You are older, you are wiser, you are more mature. I'm sure you will look back at your 20-year-old self and not think that you were the wisest and most mature, as I look back on my 20-year-old self, but you are certainly better off now than you were when you were 15 years old. So you had the emotional intelligence, or at least the argument for emotional intelligence, to be able to hear speech, see speech that is more offensive, and be able to process it appropriately. What else? What's another difference between the classroom experience here as opposed to you were in high school? Computers, yes. Alice says there are computers here. That is definitely true. Does anybody have to be here? If you guys get up and say, screw this class, I'm getting nothing out of it, and you storm out the door, my feelings will be very hurt. And I might fail you because my feelings are very hurt. Am I going to arrest you? Am I going to get a truant officer to track you down? No. Public education is compulsory in this country. You have to be, and you can drop out, right? You have the ability to drop out, but by and large, it's compulsory. You got to be there. We have a captive audience. We're going to have different things. Also, just the dynamic in college and high school is different. High school is really important. I'm not trying to diminish it at all, but the goal is definitely to educate you about facts and figures and stuff like that, more than necessarily teaching you how to be analytical, teaching you how to think about society, right? It's more of a information distribution environment than it is challenging you, the individual. So Tinker, the case that says students have free speech rights while in the classroom, does apply to universities. But what counts as a substantial and material disruption is going to be different. What do I have here? Okay, so this is a little bit old now, but I have not seen anything that has made me update it. But I don't believe any of you guys were here in 2015. Is that fair to say? Good. So in 2015, the college Republicans at UNCG, sorry, it's 2016. Sorry, 2016, because it was January 19th. During the height of the presidential primaries, posted a flyer that highlighted, I'm trying to be diplomatic with how I say this, highlighted some racially insensitive or downright racial statements made by Democratic politicians. So the point that the college Republicans were trying to make was that, Democrats aren't looking out for minorities any better than Republicans. That is the argument that is being made, and I think is fairly clear from the context of the flyer. So it was posted in the EUC and around various other places. And obviously this caused a bit of a stir, right? You have essentially, because I don't know how well you guys can see it, but there is racial slurs there, right? Not censored, they say it. Or at least they print it. And it's distributed. And Chancellor Gilliam sent out an email to the student body after this happened. And it was very carefully crafted. It was crafted in a way that I can very much tell that somebody from the legal department looked at it before it was sent out. Because you know what Chancellor Gilliam could not say? This is absolutely unacceptable, and we are going to find out who these students were, and they will be disciplined to the full extent of our academic abilities, right? We are going to suspend or expel or whatever. Can't do that, because then they are being targeted for their speech. And we're talking about, and remember, students have free speech rights so long as it is not substantially interfering with somebody's ability to be in class. Now, if somebody started using racial slurs in this class, we might have a very different argument as to whether or not it's going to cause substantial disruption. But a flyer posted in the student comments, is that going to make it difficult or impossible for the school to carry out its function, or for me to teach you guys media law, or other places in this building teaching them science? No. I also have the case of Tatro versus University of Minnesota up here. This is a 2011 case that I find super interesting. It never really got a lot of clarity on. In that case, there was a woman, she was a college student who was working, it was a course for embalming. Right? They were learning how to embalm cadavers, human people. And Facebook was a thing that college students used in 2011, as they still do now. And she was posting things on her Facebook page, things like, she'd been recently broken up with by a boyfriend, and so she took a picture of the little scalpel knife and says, "I can think of a few people I want to use this on." Or she bragged about stealing bits of human hair from the cadavers. She was suspended and she sued, saying, "Look, I got free speech rights. You're punishing me for something I put on Facebook, right?" And it's not a true threat, right? Because nobody was, actually called out. It's, probably not illegal, or so it's not. They're punishing her because of the speech. And the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals of Minnesota, the Court of Appeals of the state of Minnesota determined that Tinker applied, and that the suspension of Miss Tatro was legitimate. Because two things. Number one, it's going to make students feel unsafe, particularly the students who were presumably targeted, presumably listed, or not actually targeted, but presumably talked about in that Facebook post. And number two, that it's going to affect the university's ability to get human remains. Because if I'm donating my body to science, but I think somebody is stealing some of my hair for her personal hair collection, maybe I'm going to be a little bit less likely to donate to the University of Minnesota. And so that is a substantial disruption in the University of Minnesota to carry out its views. Not its views, sorry. It's getting late. It's curriculum, it's academics. Okay, last 5 minutes. We are going to talk about a case called Joyner versus Whitney. Really quick. This was North Carolina Central University, and North Carolina Central University is a historically Black college. And in Brown versus Board of Education, not only did we say that we prevented white-only schools, it means we couldn't have Black-only schools, right? Separate but equal is not equal. We will and cannot have racially exclusive places of education. Now, historically Black colleges are still predominantly African American and minority, but they're not exclusive. You go to A&T, they're going to be white students. In the 1970s, there was a campus newspaper like we have the Carolinian here called the Campus Echo at NCCU. And the front page article the first day of class was, "Is NCCU still a Black school?" And it said that there's a rapidly growing white population on our campus. We want to know why they are here, how many are here, and why more and more come every year by the hundreds. The really problematic phrase was, "Black students on this campus have never made it clear to those people that we are indeed separate from them in so many ways and wish to remain so. Until we make this clear by any means necessary, the same thing will continue to happen." It is a call in the student newspaper that a certain racial group is not welcome on campus. Obviously, the university didn't like that, right? White students pay tuition just as much as Black students do. We want as many high-quality candidates as we can get applying to this university. We don't want to make them feel unwelcome. So they did suspend the student, but they shut down the student newspaper permanently. And so the issue was whether the permanent denial of financial support to the newspaper because of its editorial policy abridged the freedom of speech. And this is a Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals case. I want to make that clear. Sorry, this is not a Supreme Court case. So the rule of law that comes out of this is only applicable to the states within the Fourth Circuit: North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. So, but it says that not only is the actual expulsion, not only is suspension a means by which the university can exact revenge or exact punishment on speech that it finds deplorable or abhorrent, but they can also deny financial support. And the court says, look, doesn't mean you have to have a student newspaper. But once you have a student newspaper, you can't say we're going to withdraw financial support simply because we don't like what the speaker is saying. Okay? All right, so we are going to leave it there for the evening. Please, please, please take a look at the legal analysis. Really try to understand what I'm asking you to do. If you don't understand or if you're having trouble with it, please ask me. I'm more than happy to help you guys out. Otherwise, I will be looking forward to those on Monday, and I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you then.